The biggest lie you've been sold is that safety exists. I mean, the global elite don't play a game of avoiding risk.
No, not at all.
Right. They play a highly calculated game of systematically reducing it while offloading the danger onto everyone else. You see it every day. You feel it in the economy.
Everywhere, yeah.
And this dynamic dictates exactly who acquires wealth, power, and security, and who remains perpetually vulnerable to the shocks of the market. The fundamental rules of risk are, well, universally misunderstood.
Completely misunderstood. And it's causing massive disparities.
Exactly. Disparities across both emerging markets and the developed world. We're dealing with an architecture of self-preservation that is totally invisible to the average person, yet it governs their entire life. So, for this deep dive, I want to unpack the exact science of risk.
It's a crucial topic, because if you don't understand the structure, you're the one absorbing the damage.
Spot on. So let's start by looking at the traditional image we've all been fed of the risk-taking entrepreneur. You know the one. We picture this maverick, this visionary taking wild, blind leaps of faith.
Right, the guy mortgaging his house and betting it all.
Exactly, betting it all on a single unproven idea. If we actually look at the structural reality of the world's most successful capital allocators, how accurate is that Hollywood picture?
It is a complete fabrication. It's just a persistent myth that romanticizes business while, fundamentally misrepresenting the actual mechanics of success.
So the whole motivational speech narrative is just wrong.
Totally wrong. The popular conception is that an entrepreneur's primary job is to have this enormous appetite for massive, unhedged risk. The reality is the exact opposite.
Ruthless risk elimination, right?
Exactly. The true job of the entrepreneur, or really any high-level capital allocator, is to ruthlessly and systematically eliminate risk. You do not take wild leaps into the dark.
You look for the sure thing.
You look for an inefficiency, yeah. Or an opportunity that seems glaringly obvious to you, something highly likely to win based on data or some asymmetric insight, and you execute it as cheaply as possible.
So it's not a gamble, it's a test.
Right. You run tiny, low-cost experiments until the thesis is proven. The outsider, looking in, sees a wild gamble because, well, they don't have access to the data.
They just see the final leap.
Right. But the insider has calculated the variables to such a degree that the so-called leap is actually a highly engineered, reinforced step.
I mean, if the actual goal is ruthless risk reduction, why does society operate on a completely different paradigm?
Yeah.
Because when you look at how human beings make life-altering decisions, it doesn't match up.
How do you mean?
Well, think about what university to attend, what career to choose, what industry to dedicate decades of your life to. People certainly aren't calculating objective probability.
No, they're definitely not.
They aren't doing the math on the likelihood of an outcome, so what are they doing?
They aren't doing the math because biologically, human beings are not built to evaluate risk independently. We crowdsource it.
We crowdsource risk.
Yeah. If everyone else is taking a specific path, society deems that path safe, regardless of the actual mathematical probability of success or failure. We basically equate volume of participation with security.
Oh, wow. That's a dangerous heuristic.
It is. You can see this brilliantly and really tragically illustrated in emerging markets. Take India, for example. Look at the phenomenon of highly competitive entrance exams for top engineering colleges, like the IITs.
Right. Millions of students taking those.
Millions. They dedicate the prime years of their youth, often isolating themselves completely just to vie for a few thousand seats. If you simply look at the mathematics, the statistical probability of success is staggeringly low.
It's like well under 1%, right?
Well under 1%. By any objective measure, dedicating years of your life to a singular endeavor with a fraction of a percent chance of success is an incredibly reckless, high-risk gamble.
But nobody calls it a gamble. They call it the responsible path.
Exactly. Because millions of other people are doing it alongside them, the herd mentality accepts it as the safe, standardized, culturally approved path.
Well, hold on. Let me push back on how we categorize that. Because if we're saying everything involves risk, we have to draw a line somewhere.
Sure.
If breathing polluted city air is a risk, or traveling to a foreign country and eating unfamiliar street food is a risk, how do we fundamentally separate what is a dangerous systemic economic gamble from what is merely an everyday acceptable biological hazard?
That's a great distinction to make.
Because people do die from everyday things, but we don't paralyze ourselves analyzing them.
You're hitting on the exact mechanism of the problem. You mentioned eating food. Eating is inherently risky. Statistically, there are more deaths per year from foodborne pathogens than there are from shark attacks and plane crashes combined.
Right. But we don't freak out every time we eat a sandwich.
Because the probability of getting a fatal illness from a standard meal is fractionally small. But when you travel to a new environment, say you land in an obscure region and you see a street vendor selling something you've never encountered, how do you decide if it's safe to eat?
You don't pull out a microscope and run a biochemical analysis.
Exactly. You look around to see if the locals are eating it. If there's a line of healthy-looking people buying that food, you crowdsource the risk assessment.
Your brain basically says, if it were lethal, these people would be dead.
Therefore, it's safe. That is a highly effective biological heuristic for physical survival. The catastrophic problem arises when this exact same biological heuristic is blindly applied to complex global economic decisions.
Because the rules of economics are fundamentally opposed to the rules of physical safety.
Exactly. In the physical world, high participation implies safety. In the economic world, high participation exponentially increases the risk of failure.
Because of supply and demand.
Right. If everyone is taking a specific career path, the supply of labor skyrockets, the value of the skill plummets, and the competition to secure a livable wage becomes an absolute blood sport.
So society tells you the path is safe because it's familiar and crowded.
But structurally, because the premium has been computed away, it is a massive, life-altering gamble.
Which points to a fascinating tension between our biology and our modern environment. I mean, what you're describing is a set of mental shortcuts.
Heuristics, yeah.
Heuristics that developed in small nomadic tribes hundreds of thousands of years ago, which are now being deployed to navigate a hyper-complex, digitized global economy.
The human brain has not structurally changed in 300,000 years. The hardware we use, the prefrontal cortex for planning, the amygdala for fear processing, it's the exact same hardware used by our ancestors to avoid predators.
So human nature is basically completely timeless.
Completely. We're all driven by the exact same fundamental forces: greed, fear, the desire for status, overconfidence, tribalism, and extreme short-sightedness.
People love to claim they're rational, though.
Oh, sure. They claim they aren't driven by fear or tribalism, but fundamentally, when placed under pressure, these primal behaviors dictate the flow of global capital just as much as they dictated the movement of ancient tribes.
So if human behavior is this rigid, immovable constant, where does the variable come from? If I'm listening to this deep dive right now and I'm trying to accurately position myself to take a calculated risk, how do I do that when the economic rules seem to be shifting so violently every few months?
The constant is human behavior, but the variable is technology. Behaviors rarely change, but when the behavioral technologies change, the tools we use to satisfy our timeless urges, the shift in power and wealth is permanent.
Can you give me a historical parallel for that?
Let's look at 1962. The best-selling consumer candy bar in 1962 was the Snickers bar. If you look at the market today, a Snickers bar is still at the absolute top of the global confectionery market.
Because our cravings don't change.
Exactly. Our biology, our cravings for sugar, fat, and salt do not change. But look at the technological marvel of 1962, the pocket-sized transistor radio.
Right, that was revolutionary at the time.
It revolutionized how humanity consumed information and entertainment. But today, that physical object is entirely obsolete, replaced by smartphones, wearables.
So the lesson for risk analysis is?
The profound lesson is that the most lucrative, structurally sound bets are placed precisely at the intersection of timeless human desires and rapidly shifting behavioral technologies.
You ground the offering in something immutable.
You ground it in something humans will always want regardless of the era: autonomy, mastery, status, connection, or entertainment. But you execute the delivery of that desire using the absolute newest emerging tools.
Whether that's artificial intelligence or decentralized ledger.
Advanced biotechnology, yeah. When human behavior fundamentally shifts because a new tool makes an old desire easier to fulfill, and the massive bureaucratic incumbent companies haven't noticed the shift yet because they're too slow, that is the exact window of opportunity.
That's where the odds of asymmetric success are highest.
And the actual structural risk is lowest.
Okay, let's take these abstract biological and psychological concepts and map them directly onto the movement of massive amounts of institutional capital. Because if smart risk is essentially about running cheap experiments at that intersection of timeless needs and new tech, how does that actually manifest when we're talking about billions of dollars?
It manifests very mathematically.
In the poker world, there's a concept that seems to govern this exact dynamic, right?
Yeah, you're referring to game theory optimal, or GTO. In high-stakes poker, The absolute best players in the world attempt to play a GTO strategy.
And what does that mean, stripped of the complex math?
It essentially means making decisions that are mathematically unexploitable by your opponents over the long run. You aren't trying to outsmart the other player on every single hand. You're playing a statistical framework that guarantees profitability regardless of what the opponent does, assuming a large enough sample size.
So how do you extract GTO from poker and apply it to real life in capital markets?
It boils down to the relentless pursuit of cheap experiments with massive asymmetric potential payoffs.
Meaning the cost of failure is negligible, but the reward for success is exponential.
Precisely. You want to design and execute a test where the cost of finding out if an idea works is near zero. If you launch a test and it fails, shutting it down carries no existential penalty.
It doesn't bankrupt you. It doesn't destroy your reputation.
It's just a data point. But if the test works, the upside is uncapped.
And this is the fundamental architecture of venture capital, isn't it? Because on the surface, to the general public, VC funding looks absolutely insane.
It looks like pure chaos to the outside world.
Right. It looks like billionaires throwing ungodly sums of money at reckless 20-somethings with half-baked apps. But beneath that surface narrative, it's a highly rigid, meticulously engineered system of staging risk. Let's break down that power structure. What is actually happening, mathematically and psychologically, between a seed round, a Series A, and the later stages of private equity?
The entire life cycle of startup funding is an elaborate, formalized mechanism for staging and retiring risk. It is not, as the media portrays it, just about raising money to spend money on ping-pong tables and marketing.
So let's look at the genesis, the seed stage.
Right. A founder has an idea, maybe a crude prototype, but absolutely nothing is proven. The risk at this stage is absolute. The company has a very high probability of going to zero.
So how does the investor price that?
An early-stage investor might come in and offer, say, $2 million, which is a substantial amount of capital, but they will demand 50% of the company, valuing the entire highly speculative entity at $4 million.
And they demand half the equity, not out of pure malice.
No, not at all. They demand it because they are absorbing total foundational risk. They require a massive piece of the company so that if this 1 in 100 long shot actually becomes a unicorn, the sheer magnitude of the payoff covers the losses of the other 99 seed investments in their portfolio that inevitably went to zero.
So the initial valuation at the seed stage has almost nothing to do with current revenue or traditional corporate finance metrics.
Nothing at all.
It's a pure mathematical reflection of the existential risk the investor is taking on. But then what happens at Series A? Because we constantly see these tech headlines where a company suddenly jumps from a $4 million valuation to a $40 million valuation in a matter of 18 months.
And yet they still aren't turning any real profit.
Exactly. To the outside world, this looks like a speculative bubble.
It looks like a bubble if you're evaluating it through the lens of a traditional bakery or brick-and-mortar store. But in the architecture of staged risk, it makes perfect sense. At Series A, the revenue might not have changed significantly. They might have gone from zero revenue to just a few $1,000s a month.
But the valuation skyrockets by a multiple of 10. Why?
Because specific existential risks have been successfully retired. They have been checked off the list. By the time a founder reaches Series A, they've proven they can actually engineer and ship a functional product.
They've proven they can hire good people.
Exactly. They've convinced highly skilled engineers to leave safe jobs and join their team. They've proven they can execute basic go-to-market strategies and acquire actual users, even if those users aren't fully monetized yet.
So those massive operational risks are just gone.
They are fundamentally eliminated from the equation. The structural danger of the company is drastically lower. So the next investor who comes in for the Series A might put in the exact same $2 million, but because the risk profile is reduced, they'll only demand 5% of the company instead of 50%.
The valuation has shot up not because of profit, but because the map has been cleared of its deadliest landmines.
The terrifying unknown has become a manageable known.
And then you reach the much later stages, Series C, Series D, and eventually private equity. The players change, and I imagine the math completely changes as well.
The rules of the game invert entirely. Later stage private equity investors take almost zero foundational risk. They are not in the business of betting on whether a founder has the charisma to build a team or the technical chops to scale a database.
They wait until it's a sure thing.
They wait until the business model is definitively proven, the market share is established, and the cash flow is predictable. They value companies purely on actual revenue and EBITDA multipliers.
That's just standard finance at that point.
Yeah. If the company is generating $50 million in verifiable revenue and the standard industry multiplier is 10, the valuation is $500 million. They are optimizing for a completely different risk profile, avoiding the suicidal experimental risk-taking of the early stages and deploying massive amounts of leverage to bet on verified, audited math.
I want to push you on this dynamic because it's crucial we apply this macro framework to the everyday individual. If venture capitalists and elite founders are utilizing this complex staging architecture to insulate themselves from the blast radius of failure, who is actually absorbing the risk?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because risk doesn't just vanish into the ether. It has to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Who is holding the bag in this shifting landscape?
The everyday worker is holding the bag. Specifically, those who fall into the trap of the gig economy and freelance contracts with unproven early-stage startups.
Okay, explain that. How does the freelancer absorb the risk?
If you want to see who absorbs the uncompensated risk in the modern economy, look at the hidden incentives of hiring. Why does a seed-stage founder choose to hire a network of freelancers instead of bringing on full-time employees?
Well, the standard PR answer is that they want to remain agile.
Right.
So they're building a lean, dynamic organization.
That is the sanitized, socially acceptable narrative. The structural truth is entirely different. The founder wants to avoid the rigid commitment of a full-time hire because they harbor deep mathematical doubts about whether their company will even be solvent in 3 months.
They just don't have the cash.
They simply do not have the guaranteed financial cash flow or the institutional stability to justify a permanent addition to their payroll, a payroll which comes with severance obligations, health care, and legal protections.
So what do?
They offload that existential financial risk directly onto the freelancer. The freelancer, looking at the arrangement, mistakenly believes they have secured a job, a steady income stream, and a line on their resume.
But in reality,
they have unwittingly absorbed the startup's potential death into their own personal career trajectory.
That is a staggering way to frame it. The freelancer, who has the least amount of capital and power in the equation, is essentially providing a massive subsidy of stability to the founder and the venture capitalist.
Exactly. And the freelancer is doing this without capturing any of the upside. They are taking the existential risk of a founder, but they're being compensated with the capped, stagnant wage of an employee.
This has massive cross-country implications for how people should build their careers, doesn't it?
Huge implications. If you are a freelancer doing contract work for massive, deeply entrenched conglomerates companies like Coca-Cola or Microsoft offers genuine safety, you know with absolute certainty that Coca-Cola will exist next year.
The tail risk of them defaulting on your invoices is practically zero.
Right. You can plan your life around that cash flow. But relying on a fragmented portfolio of unproven, hyper-volatile startups means you are literally burning the prime years of your career.
Because if they fail, you get nothing.
Think about the outcome. If, in 2 years, all 5 of the small startups you contracted for run out of runway and go under, you are left with zero momentum. You've built zero network within stable, powerful institutions.
You've absorbed 100% of their failure without holding a single share of their equity upside.
You took all the risk, and the founders and investors walk away to play the game again.
Listen, if you, the listener, value these kinds of structural, uncompromising breakdowns of economic power dynamics, and how the world actually operates behind closed doors, make sure you subscribe to this deep dive. Our entire purpose here is to strip away the surface narratives and expose the underlying mechanics of power and capital.
It's the only way to actually protect yourself.
So let's push this analysis even deeper. We've established the structural offloading of risk. The math is clear, the power dynamics are clear. But why do people willingly, almost enthusiastically, walk into these traps?
Psychology plays a huge part.
Right. Why do highly educated individuals flock to opportunities that are mathematically dangerous while actively avoiding paths that offer a much higher probability of success? It seems to come down to a massive systemic disparity in information.
Information disparity is the engine that drives perceived risk. Sitting outside an industry makes it entirely impossible to judge its actual internal risks.
Because you just see the PR.
Exactly. From the outside, you do not see the unit economics, you don't see the regulatory friction, and you do not see the daily operational nightmares. You only see the socially acceptable narratives projected by the media and your peers.
Let's make that concrete. Give me a specific example of how this information disparity plays out in real time, determining who succeeds and who gets wiped out.
Let's compare two hypothetical career paths for an ambitious individual right now. Path A, building a software platform for the institutional finance industry. Path B, creating a highly specific, elite video editing agency.
Okay, so let's say a Sharge computer science student decides they're going to build a SaaS application for hedge funds.
Right, without having any actual background working inside a hedge fund. Society, their university professors, and their peers will universally applaud this decision. It is highly socially acceptable.
Being a fintech founder sounds prestigious at dinner parties. It signals intelligence and ambition.
But the actual mathematical risk they are taking is astronomical. Because they lack insider knowledge, they'll likely spend their first 2 entire years just trying to understand the arcane nuances of the industry.
Like who the real decision makers are?
Or what actually drives institutional revenue, or what the subtle, lethal regulatory compliance risks entail. They are operating completely blind to the structural realities of the beast they're trying to tame.
But they feel entirely safe because the cultural feedback loop is constantly telling them they are doing the right thing.
Precisely. The social validation masks the mathematical danger. Now, contrast that highly praised path with starting a high-tier video editing service targeting corporate clients and major digital creators.
Which doesn't have the same dinner party ring to it.
Right now, in many economies, particularly in places like India or even parts of Europe, video editing is still viewed as a blue-collar digital trade. It's not yet seen as a socially prestigious, high-tier career.
You don't see 100 influencers on LinkedIn bragging about making massive margins as an editor.
No. And because the role lacks high social acceptability, the prestige-driven talent pool avoids it. The competition is incredibly low. People are hesitant to enter the field because their parents won't understand it, and their peers won't respect it.
But the demand is exploding.
The demand is vertical. The sheer volume of institutional capital flooding into the creator economy, digital marketing, and corporate media means the actual risk of failing as a highly competent, reliable video editor is currently far lower than the risk of failing as a generic software engineer.
Especially now with tech layoffs.
In the software space, venture funding is tightening, layoffs are rampant, and the market is utterly saturated with desperate talent. By entering the socially unaccepted, unglamorous field, you benefit immensely from information disparity.
You face almost zero competent competition.
Which drastically lowers your fundamental risk while your pricing power goes through the roof.
Okay, but let's look at the psychology of the person who actually understands this. Even when the math makes perfect sense, even when someone can clearly see the information disparity, knows a path is less competitive, and recognizes the prestige trap for what it is, people still refuse to take the calculated shot.
They stay in the saturated, dying industry.
Why does human psychology continuously override objective, undeniable probability?
It comes down to a deeply ingrained evolutionary cognitive bias known as loss aversion. Psychologically and neurologically, a financial or social loss hurts you twice as much as a proportional gain feels good.
This is well documented in behavioral economics, right?
Countless studies have proven it. If you make an investment and it triples your net worth, you feel a surge of dopamine, you feel satisfied. But if you take a risk and lose that exact same initial amount of capital, the psychological devastation is profound.
It triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain.
Exactly. And because of this primal biological fear of loss, people paralyze themselves. They demand absolute guarantees in a complex economic system that only offers probabilities.
And this paralysis, this desperation to avoid loss while still wanting to succeed, leads people into what you might call the deadliest zone of all, the medium risk.
Oh, the medium risk is fatal.
I want to spend some time here because this seems to be where most people get slaughtered. Can you detail the specific structural and psychological danger of taking a medium risk?
The medium risk is the graveyard of ambitious people. It is where intelligent, well-meaning individuals completely destroy their lives and their finances. A medium risk is defined as taking a leap with a safety net that is theoretically present, but practically inadequate.
The illusion of preparation.
Let's walk through the scenario. You decide to quit your corporate job to start a company. You build a spreadsheet, and you calculate that you need 3 months of dedicated time and capital to build the initial product and secure your first paying client.
Okay, so 3 months is the target.
Being responsible, you save up 6 months of living expenses in your bank account, what we call your runway. To the average person, to the normie giving you advice, this feels incredibly responsible. You have double the runway you think you need.
You've mathematically hedged your bet. You feel secure.
But the real world is infinitely more hostile and chaotic than a spreadsheet. What happens when it doesn't take 3 months to get a client? What if the macro market shifts or a global supply chain crisis hits or a competitor launches a free version of your product?
And suddenly it takes 8 months to get traction.
The moment you cross into month 5, the reality of the medium risk hits you. You are almost out of money. And this is where the mechanism of failure accelerates.
And panic sets in.
The psychological panic of running out of runway completely warps your prefrontal cortex. The stress literally degrades your cognitive ability to make strategic long-term decisions. You shift from playing to win to playing not to die.
Which forces you into a death spiral of short-term thinking.
Exactly. You're forced to make terrible, desperate choices just to keep the lights on for one more week. You take on toxic, high-maintenance clients who drain your resources but pay a fraction of your rate.
You compromise the integrity of your core product to chase a quick buck.
Or, ultimately, the psychological pressure breaks you and you abandon the project entirely just inches from the finish line, forced to take the very first low-paying, soul-crushing job you can find just to survive.
So the medium risk wiped you out.
It wasn't because your idea was bad. You failed because you were close enough to the financial edge that a completely normal, expected variance in the timeline pushed you off the cliff.
So the defense against the medium risk isn't to just avoid taking the leap entirely.
Yeah.
The defense is to fundamentally change your relationship with the ground you're landing on.
Yes. You have to change how you land.
And this brings us to a crucial concept you've referenced before, deep optionality, which draws on frameworks popularized by thinkers like the late Hans Rosling. What exactly is deep optionality, and how does it differentiate from the fake optionality that most professionals spend their lives pursuing?
Most people in the corporate world pursue fake optionality. Fake optionality is going on 10 job interviews, not because you actually want to quit your current job or pivot your career, but simply to collect offers so you feel desired by the market.
It's acquiring a superficial credential or a minor certificate just to pad a resume.
It provides an illusion of safety, a fleeting dopamine hit of security, because you haven't actually tested your ability to survive a real structural transition. Deep optionality is something entirely different.
What is it then?
Deep optionality is pure, unadulterated anti-fragility. It is the capacity to thrive in chaos.
How do we visualize that practically? Because anti-fragility can sound like an academic buzzword.
Let's use the biological analogy of human walking. Human beings have spent hundreds of thousands of years evolving and mastering the complex biomechanics of bipedal balance.
Okay, so it's embedded in us.
Because of that embedded subconscious mastery, you can seamlessly transition from walking on solid concrete to trekking through thick mud to navigating burning hot, shifting sand on a beach, and your body adjusts automatically.
Your stabilizers fire, your gait alters.
You do not have to stop, sit down, and consciously relearn the physics of walking for every new surface. Deep optionality in a career functions exactly the same way.
Meaning what, structurally?
It means rigorously mastering core, highly transferable, timeless skills so that you can survive and thrive on absolutely any economic surface, regardless of what the market does.
So we absolutely aren't talking about hard technical skills. We aren't talking about knowing a specific programming language or how to operate a specific piece of machinery.
No, because hard technical skills are fragile. They inevitably become obsolete as the technology cycles. An engineer who thought they were entirely invulnerable 10 years ago because they mastered a complex coding language is now waking up to a harsh reality.
They're competing with generative AI models that can write, debug, and deploy that same code in seconds.
Deep optionality relies on mastering the meta skills that underpin all human enterprise. The skills that machines struggle to replicate because they involve human psychology and friction.
Like what?
I'm talking about mastering distribution, how to get a product in front of millions of people, understanding the intricate mechanics of structuring wealth sharing and equity pools to attract and retain elite talent.
Mastering the dark arts and psychology of hiring the right people.
The fundamental art of sales, negotiation, and marketing. If you master how to capture human attention, persuade a skeptic, and sell a grand vision, it absolutely does not matter if you're selling enterprise software in 2025, or holographic neural interfaces in 2040, or water purification systems during a climate crisis.
The technological surface changes entirely, but your ability to walk remains absolute.
Exactly. Your ability to generate value is permanent.
I want to challenge you to project these strategies into the long term, pushing this beyond the individual freelancer or small founder. We're really talking about the architecture of elite wealth preservation here.
The absolute pinnacle of it.
How do the truly wealthy, the people operating at the absolute apex of the global economy, the billionaires, the sovereign wealth funds, the mega founders, how do they insulate themselves against catastrophic failure? Because they certainly aren't just relying on transferable soft skills.
No, they're using massive structural capital defense mechanisms to ensure they never experience a medium risk scenario. They play a different sport entirely. And the core of that structural defense mechanism is the concept of shock absorbers.
Let's break that down. What is a shock absorber in this context?
As we discussed with the tragedy of the medium risk, taking a gamble without a massive, unshakable cash reserve is suicidal. The working class and the middle class are forced to optimize for pure survival.
Their entire risk profile is dictated by the urgent, unyielding need to pay rent and buy groceries next month.
The wealthy possess a totally different risk profile. Because their baseline survival is perpetually, permanently secured by their shock absorbers, their vast, liquid, highly accessible cash reserves and diversified assets, they're freed from the panic of survival.
So they can afford to optimize purely for reputation, political power, and asymmetric upside.
Let's look at Silicon Valley as the prime specific example of the structural reality in action. How does a globally recognized founder, someone who has raised tens of millions of dollars and is on the cover of magazines, actually handle their own personal unquantifiable tail risk?
Most people assume they just go all in on their own company.
It's a fascinating, highly networked, and entirely rational system of self-preservation. A venture-funded founder in global tech hubs like Silicon Valley, or increasingly in places like London or Bangalore, will often pay themselves a very reasonable, comfortable six-figure salary from the capital they raise.
So they aren't starving.
They aren't starving. But then they do something the average worker would never even conceive of. They immediately take portions of their personal wealth and actively angel invest in 50 or 100 other founder startups within their immediate network.
Wait, let's unpack the logic of that. They're running their own high-growth, brutally high-stress company, working 80-hour weeks. But instead of focusing all their financial resources on their own survival, they are deploying their personal capital into the companies of their competitors, their peers, and their friends.
Yes, and it is a stroke of structural genius, because they are meticulously hedging the tail risk of their own company failing. Even the most brilliant, arrogant founder knows deep down that a black swan event could happen.
A global pandemic, a sudden and aggressive regulatory shift, a macroeconomic credit freeze.
Any of those could instantly wipe out their specific company, regardless of how hard they work. By distributing their personal capital across 100 other highly vetted founders who are also working 80-hour weeks in different sectors, they construct an indestructible safety net.
They ensure that if their own ship hits an iceberg and sinks, they still own a lucrative piece of the 3 ships in their armada that successfully navigated the storm and became billion-dollar unicorns.
Exactly. They might fail publicly as a CEO, their company might go to zero, but they will become fabulously, quietly wealthy as an investor. This is the elite hedging mechanism. It is socializing the upside while isolating the downside.
And they deploy similar ruthless tactics even when their own company is succeeding, right? Let's talk about the strategy of the secondary stock sale, because this is where the disparity between the working class mindset and the capital class mindset becomes blindingly obvious.
The secondary sale is the ultimate manifestation of risk elimination. Let's say an elite investor or an early founder puts $1 million, their original corpus, into a seed stage startup.
Okay, $1 million in.
Over a few years of brutal work and market expansion, the company grows rapidly, and that initial stake is now valued on paper at $4 million. A novice, someone driven by pure, unbridled greed and the Hollywood narrative of letting it ride, would keep the entire $4 million locked in the company.
Praying that the valuation eventually hits $20 million.
Right. But they remain fully exposed to the risk of the company collapsing. The elite investor plays a completely different, mathematically sound game. During the very next funding round, when institutional money is pouring in, they will quietly execute a secondary sale.
They sell a portion to the new investors.
They will sell exactly 25% of their stake to the new incoming investors. By doing so, they liquidate $1 million. They take out their original foundational corpus.
They pull their initial risk capital off the table and put it safely back into their diversified bank accounts or government bonds.
The remaining $3 million of stock is left in the company to ride the upside. The psychological and financial shift here is profound. They have ensured absolute, unbreakable capital protection.
They are now playing entirely with house money.
If the company is destroyed the next day by an unquantifiable tail risk or a massive scandal, they have lost zero of their foundational wealth. Their downside is literally capped at zero.
That is a profound paradigm shift. It completely destroys the myth of the reckless gambler. It's not about making the absolute maximum amount of money possible on a single heroic bet.
No, it's about systematically, ruthlessly eliminating the mathematical possibility of being wiped out while remaining structurally exposed to the limitless upside.
And maintaining this posture requires a very specific, almost unnatural psychological mindset, especially when times are great and everyone is making money.
It requires what elite operators call productive paranoia. The best capital allocators, the true survivors, are highly paranoid during the absolute best of times.
When revenue is flowing effortlessly, when the market is euphoric.
And when their peers are buying yachts, they're the ones locked in their offices, obsessively looking for the hidden microscopic cracks in the foundation. They maintain an excess pipeline of leads. They hoard an excess reserve of cash.
They operate under the daily, agonizing assumption that their biggest client could leave tomorrow.
Or that their primary distribution channel could be shut down by an algorithmic update. By building that intense paranoia into their daily operational metrics, they essentially act as their own internal, unforgiving venture capitalists.
They ensure they always have the runway and the optionality to pivot before the crisis becomes existential.
Always.
This aligns perfectly with billionaire investor Howard Marks' concept of second-level thinking, which separates the amateurs from the institutions.
It is the exact same philosophy. First-level thinking is shallow, reactive, and crowdsourced. First-level thinking is looking at the stock market or the real estate sector and saying, everyone is buying, the economy is booming, corporate earnings are up, therefore the structural risk is low, I should invest.
Which is what everyone does at the peak of a bubble.
Exactly. Second-level thinking, the exclusive domain of the elite, recognizes the supreme irony of markets. The real danger isn't what everyone fears, it's what everyone ignores.
When the herd is euphoric and pouring trillions of dollars into a specific sector, the asset prices are driven up to absolute perfection.
And because perfection is priced in, there is zero margin for error. Therefore, the actual structural risk of losing your capital is at its absolute highest peak when everyone feels the safest.
Conversely, when there is widespread blood in the streets panic-like, the immediate, terrifying aftermath of a global financial crisis or a pandemic lockdown, prices collapse.
Competitors go bankrupt. The herd flees in terror. When everyone is terrified to deploy capital, the actual mathematical risk of entry is historically at its absolute lowest because the worst-case scenario is already baked into the discounted price.
I want to bring this conversation to a sharp, predictive point about where the global economy is heading right now today. We are watching artificial intelligence fundamentally saturate markets.
It's moving faster than almost anyone predicted.
It is automating complex. It is aggressively eliminating traditional barriers to entry that used to protect the middle class. Where does this terrifying shift leave the individual who is trying to accurately navigate future risk?
To understand the future trajectory of the global workforce, you have to understand a specific poker concept called multi-way variance. Imagine you are sitting at a large poker table in a casino. If 9 people are sitting at the table, all dealt into the hand, luck and statistical variance play a massive outsized role in who wins the pot.
Even if you are a world-class player and you hold an incredible starting hand.
Right. The sheer mathematical probability that one of the other 8 people randomly drew a better hand or catches a lucky card on the river is dangerously high. The sheer volume of participants dilutes your skill advantage.
But if everyone else folds and you are playing heads-up one-on-one against a single opponent, the variance drops dramatically.
The noise is eliminated and pure concentrated skill dominates the outcome.
How does that specific dynamic apply to the modern global market and the onslaught of AI?
Right now, choosing to enter a highly competitive, socially acceptable, low-barrier market like building a generic AI wrapper app or becoming a standard entry-level software engineer or launching a generic digital marketing agency is the equivalent of sitting down at the 9-player poker table.
You are willingly subjecting yourself to massive, uncontrollable multi-way variance.
Millions of highly educated people across the globe, armed with the exact same AI tools, are doing the exact same thing. It fundamentally doesn't matter how skilled or dedicated you are. The sheer overwhelming volume of competitors means that blind luck, algorithmic whims, and random variance will likely dictate whether you get funded.
or whether your app goes viral, or whether you get hired.
Exactly.
So the alternative is forcing the market into a one-on-one game. You have to find a way to clear the table.
Yes. The future of wealth accumulation belongs exclusively to those who have the psychological fortitude to enter uncrowded, unsexy, physically demanding, or even seemingly crackpot markets.
These are the specialized, friction-heavy areas with zero social support.
Where people at dinner parties might actively laugh at your business model. Industrial waste management, specialized high-voltage infrastructure maintenance, highly niche hardware integration.
Because no one else wants to do it, because it lacks prestige and requires enduring friction, you face almost zero competent competition.
By operating in these obscure, unloved sectors, you buy yourself the most valuable asset in business, a 2-year head start. You get 24 quiet months to refine your product, build relationships, secure contracts, and dig a massive execution moat without anyone breathing down your neck.
By the time the herd realizes there's massive, predictable cash flow to be made in your boring niche, your structural advantage is entirely insurmountable.
They cannot cross the moat. You spent 2 years quietly digging. You forced a one-on-one game, and you won it before they even sat down.
If you, as the listener, are trying to figure out exactly where you sit at that table, hit the like button on this deep dive and leave a comment below. Tell us about a specific risk you are currently trying to model in your own career, your own industry, or your life.
It's vital to assess where you really stand.
Are you facing terrifying deep variance at a crowded 9-player table, or have you found a structural, uncrowded niche where you can build a moat? Let's stimulate some real debate down there about what actual mathematical safety looks like in your specific field.
Because the definition of safety is changing right under our feet.
It really is. And we need to wrap up these core themes, but I want to leave you with a chilling, unresolved realization. We've spent this entire time breaking down the invisible machinery of the world.
We've exposed how risk is crowdsourced by the fearful.
How the elite meticulously stage capital to protect their original corpus. And how deep optionality allows you to walk across the parting sand of any economic shift. But look at the horizon.
It's shifting rapidly.
As artificial intelligence increasingly models the physical and economic world, as it ingests decades of historical data, perfectly optimizes global supply chains, and mathematically eliminates predictable, standard risks out of the market, safety will become entirely commoditized.
The machines will handle all the safe, predictable, optimized bets.
Which means the only remaining premiums in the future global economy, the only places where true asymmetric wealth and power will be generated, will be paid exclusively to those human beings willing to absorb the extreme, chaotic, unquantifiable tail risks that machines are specifically programmed to avoid.
That's the only premium left.
You have to look at your life and ask yourself a very uncomfortable question. Are you currently building the deep structural shock absorbers required to survive the terrifying unknown of the future? Or are you just blindly following the herd into a crowded casino, playing a game where the house and the algorithm always wins?